Great. Why don't we go ahead and get started, if that's okay with you, Dr. Sherwani, and then folks can join in as they come.
Yeah, let's get started.
Great. Well, welcome everyone to our Open Silicon Valley and Open Southern California joint session on fundraising. My name's Mohammed Shahzad. I'm the president of Open SoCal. We have the privilege of an amazing guest speaker today who'll share a ton of stories of his experience as a founder of multiple companies across the globe. I've got a series of questions for Dr. Sherwani, and depending on time and interest, we'll also open up to any questions from the audience. So as I mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to come to some of those at the end. Also, just logistically, please, for those of you just joining, if you can mute your lines so we have minimal feedback. Before we get to the chat, though, let me just take a minute and introduce Open for those of you that are new to our organization. So what is Open? Open is a global membership-based organization with chapters across the world with really a single focus: to become the most trusted and influential global network of entrepreneurs and professionals of Pakistani heritage. Really, the goal here is to create a vibrant career platform connecting and empowering entrepreneurs and professionals through dynamic global chapters. In Southern California, we're at the early stages of launching and really reestablishing a new chapter here, or rather an extension of our presence up in Silicon Valley that for Open is one of the longest and perhaps the most storied histories of all of our chapters. If you want to get involved or have ideas for folks that should get involved, especially here down in Southern California, but really anywhere in the world, please reach out to me directly. I'll add my contact info in the chat. And it's just a little plug for our little growing ecosystem in Southern California. So with that intro a little bit, let me just do a quick introduction of our speaker, and then we'll plunge right into the questions. So Dr. Naveed Sherwani, he's a well-known semiconductor industry veteran, researcher, author, serial entrepreneur, and academic. Throughout his 35 years of experience, he's formed and built several companies, including Intel Microelectronics Services, Open Silicon, Bright Semiconductor, and the list goes on. And it's actually all over the globe, from here in the US to China and in between. He's successfully raised over $500 million in funding from leading venture capitalists and created over $3 billion in value. He's earned both a PhD and master's degree in computer engineering at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a BE degree at NED University in Karachi. It was actually his time in undergraduate that he started his first company called the Coaching Center when he was 18 years old. And it went on to become a technical training college with hundreds of students within a couple of years. After earning his PhD in 1988, Dr. Sherwani served as a professor at Western Michigan University for 6 years before joining Intel in 1994. At Intel, his work was focused on the design automation of some of the most complex chips of that era. In 1999, he founded Intel Microelectronics Services, raising funds from Intel Capital. Later, he founded Open Silicon in 2003 and raised funding from leading VCs, including Sequoia, Norwest, and Interwest. Open Silicon became a leader in chip design services and later was sold to private equity in 2008. He then founded Bright Semiconductor in 2008, which is a leading solution provider in China. He raised funding from leading VCs in China and ultimately sold that business to SMIC in 2012. So as you can tell, an incredibly storied career, and that bio doesn't even really do it justice. But let me just start off by saying thank you to Dr. Sherwani for joining us for this session out of his busy schedule. At the moment, he happens to be in Shanghai, so it's close to the middle of the night for him. So we appreciate him joining. And I've gotten to know him over the last few weeks, and I know we're in for an entertaining session. He's a storyteller at heart, so we're gonna really lead some questions with him that he will bring to life through some of his stories. So maybe Dr. Sherwani, just to get you warmed up, the first question I'll start with: when did you first realize you wanted to start a company? Why did you want to?
I will ask you for help.
So, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's always a great pleasure to talk to entrepreneurs. And in any which way we can help, that's great, because I would not be here without the help of lots and lots of people the last 35, 40 years. So I think anything that we can do to help other entrepreneurs is only helps the ecosystem. It helps us, helps everybody. So I think my entrepreneurial journey started from a kind of I have a very curious mind. So from a very young age, and whenever I would see something, I was asked a question, how is this working? So for example, even now, I go to a business, I basically say, what do you think their revenue is? What do you think expenses are? You think it's a profitable business? Do you think it can be improved? From simple gadgets when I was young to businesses, I always ask this question, what do you think this guy's making money? You think it can be improved? And I think this curiosity led me to building my first company, because when the way I started my first company was I was standing in NED paying my tuition fee because I got admitted. But there were some people protesting there because they didn't get admitted. And I actually said, that's kind of interesting. Why are they protesting? They were protesting because in NED, there were some quota seats. Those seats, 25 seats out of 285 or some number like that, were actually given to people which are not on merit. So I said, that's kind of curious that 25 people are protesting like that. So then when I looked at the data, I went to registrar's office. I said, you have this data? And they said, yes, we do. Who was number one, who was number two, so on and so forth. So they admitted 285 people. The question is, what is the difference between the 286 person and 285? Maybe the 286th person on the ranking order sneezed in the exam and he missed out one question and 1 point and he got eliminated, right? So the idea came to my mind is, can I take the people who would have been naturally in 1,000, top 1,000, and try to make them 2% better? Then they would really make it into the top 285. So I started this center telling the parents that I will get your kids into this prestigious university called NED at that time. And I would guarantee it. And if I can't, I'll give you money back. And the reason for the theory of the money back was I'm already working with the people who would have really get in anyway, right? Because so what I used to do is to give them a test, because the tests were generally available. And so they would take them. If in my view, they would score enough to be in the top 1,000, then I will admit them. Then I all have to just teach them a little bit of exam taking skills, focus, prepare, and then you would do that. And actually within 3 years, we had 225 students. I had 11 employees, and I was earning around 25,000 rupees per month. Now that is an amazing amount, because when I graduated and I got a job after NED, my job was 1,860 rupees per month. And my whole family and entire mohalla basically congratulated me. The guy has got a job. And they all knew that I make that other kind of money. But that was the value of entrepreneurship in Pakistan back then. Nobody appreciated the entrepreneur who's making a ton of money. And they said, oh my God, this guy got a job. What lucky guy he is. And he got 1,860 rupees per month. So that's how the entrepreneurship journey started. Always look at businesses, look at opportunities, challenges, and always ask the question, can I make it better? Why would I make it? Why other people didn't make it better? Is there any money to be made if you make it better? So that's how I started. Yeah. And I think everything that I've done is like that.
No, that's fantastic. And obviously you took the chance at the time, and this sounds like it was more of a self-funded operation. So maybe just switching gears then, what's in your mind the best time to raise money, and is there a way to time the fundraising correctly? I know one of the questions in the chat that someone put down was, how can startups obtain funding with just a bare idea? Like if you're doing something that's hardware oriented, if you don't have a prototype, if you're doing a software business, but you have a concept or a mock-up, like when do you think is the best time to approach investors, and how do you time it well?
So first of all, I think fundraising is something that you do all the time. You don't do that when you have a startup. And it is not something that you say, oh, I have a startup. Okay, when you have an idea, okay, now step two, now let's do fundraising. That I think is the wrong approach. The right approach is you should always be fundraising, which what does it mean? It means you should, there are many different steps to fundraising, but the most important thing is you should definitely teach yourself about fundraising. I think this is one of the very misunderstood area. What is fundraising? So I think that is one thing. And fundraising is a skill. People do not come from the gods. They do not receive any instruction from God. It is something that you can learn. Secondly, there is nothing in anybody's DNA that we have found which says, oh, this is a gene for fundraising. Nothing like that. It is a skill. It is something that you learn. It's a complicated skill. It is not as easy that you connect two electrodes and the electricity will conduct. It is complicated skill. It requires networking skills. It requires presentation skills. It requires constantly being able to understand how do you interact with people and create value and so on and so forth. But I think the time to raise money is always. If you are an entrepreneur, you should always be raising money. The stage of your company could be changing, but if you're not constantly building your network, if you're not constantly dedicating a certain amount of your time every day, every week, every month, allocated time for networking. Networking could be for hiring people, networking for getting more ideas, networking for fundraising. But I think that is a very, very important thing. Second, I think important thing about fundraising, in my view, is that starting to do fundraising when you need it is that's when you're desperate. And that is one, I think it is, so you have to anticipate that you need fundraising 6 months from now, 9 months from now, a year from now, depending on the size of fundraising. If I'm raising $10 million, I should at least start 6 months in advance. If I'm raising $100 million, I would start 1 year in advance. I've done bigger raises like $250 million, $300 million. Well, then you should really be starting a year and a half in advance, right? So I think fundraising is something you can learn, number one. Number two, you should always be investing in your infrastructure to do fundraise. Another thing about fundraising is most people is that you can learn fundraising. And the way you learn fundraising, you do 3 things. First, go to a formal class. People who know fundraising, learn from them. Get a mentor who will teach you fundraising. Third, participate in other people's fundraising when you're not fundraising for yourself. That builds your skill. Volunteer. Somebody's fundraising, why don't I help you? I'll make your pitch deck. Let me sit in your fundraising. Let me practice with the team. So you could actually, while you don't have your idea yet, you're not doing any startup, but volunteer to help other people. Volunteer to participate in anybody's arranging, competitions, pitch decks, things like learn from others. I think that's all part of fundraising in my view. So the right answer is you should always be fundraising.
Great. So Dr. Sherwani, just going down that same thread, then how do you know how much capital to raise? Like, was there a time where you ended up raising, quote unquote, more capital than you needed, or quote unquote less capital than you needed? And how do you balance ownership and giving company away with having enough runway? Like, what's the formula for balancing ownership versus dilution and size of raise?
So I follow the following principle. My principle is the best fundraising happens when you have the best business plan. The best business plan should be as predictable as possible as it can be in a startup, so that it tells you what is your valuation today. Let's say I have a venture right now, the value.
Sorry, we lost the last 10 seconds here.
I think somehow I got muted. Yeah, so I was saying that my formula for fundraising, amount of fundraising, has something to do with as good a business plan as you can come up with. So what is a business plan? Business plan should tell you as accurately as possible how much money do you really need before your next fundraise, right? So what does it mean? It means you should be able to accurately tell me that what is your valuation today? What do you think your valuation would be by the time you do the next fundraise? So the valuation difference should tell you how much money to raise. And that will come from your cash flow, but also the valuation difference. So if I'm 55 million today, I'm raising $20 million. And after a year, I could be $150 million. Then I can judge how much money should I raise. So you have to know your business plan. You have to have an innate sense of your valuation. And you have to know that by adding this money, how much valuation can I add? So one thing I tell people, that when you do your yearly plan, you should do your bookings, you should do your revenue, you should do expenses, but you should do one more thing, set a target valuation. I consider valuation as part of the business plan. For every business I've run, I said, okay, what is my valuation? So for example, right now, one of my companies I'm building is a company called Rapid Silicon. So I told the team, I'm going to do a $40 million raise approximately 6 months from now, but I will only do that if you achieve these 7 things. If you don't achieve these 7 things, I'm not going to raise the money, because the valuation that I want to raise the money is predicated on these 7 things. If you're missing one of the 7 things, the valuation goes down, then the amount I can raise also goes down, because we all want to get diluted for a certain percentage, right? So I think setting the goal for valuation comes from having a good business plan, having a very good sense of what your burn rate is, and then computing, okay, what dilution do I want? And based on that, you can raise the money. So it's a fund, it's a how much dilution you want versus how much burn rate that you have, and it's the equation between the two.
Great, great. So how do you then deal with investors that have said no? And I know one of the questions someone put in the chat is, how do you wow an investor after an initial poor outcome? Like, how do you deal with that rejection? I'm sure you've raised money for other ventures from investors who first said no to other things. How do you feel? How do you handle that? How do you go back to those investors, if at all?
So first of all, I think entrepreneurship is very hard. So I recommend it for people who really, really want to get a lot of punishment in life and enjoy it. And fundraising is the hardest part, and I tell you why it is. So most of us are trained to be either engineers or MBAs and things like that, but it's all based on logic. Logic says that world works on Newtonian physics. What does the Newtonian physics tells you? That when you apply force on something, it moves. So when we try to solve a problem, let's say we are trying to solve 100 problems or 100 things. So 99% of the time, when we apply some effort, it yields and it gives you some results. So that's most of the engineers, that's how they think. Now let's apply sales. In sales, if you do the same 100 things, 90 will not yield any results, but 10 will. So the salespeople are able to take a lot more rejection than normal engineers, who really get very upset that if 98 things work and 2 things don't work, because they are not apparently observing Newtonian laws. In fundraising, if you apply 100 things, typically only 1 works. I'll give you some real numbers. I recently raised $90 million for one of my companies. We literally went through 800 meetings to do that. Out of the 800 meetings, I can basically tell you probably 95% of them were no's of one kind or the other. Now, this is the severe kind of punishment that you take. And so you should never take percentages and things like that and to celebrate your success rate. You should only just look at how many people are saying yes or maybe, and you are going forward. The people who have said no, just move on. You'll hit them sometime later, right? So the way I try to explain to people is how would you become an Olympic player? Because Olympics are just going on. An average woman or a girl, I should say, which is actually doing ice dancing in front of 1.2 billion people, she had fallen on ice 10,000 times before she ever got selected for Olympics. In all the 10,000 times, she got up and did it again. If any of these times, if she did not get up, she would not have been in the Olympics. So if you want to be an Olympic player, you need to be able to fall down on the very hard ice and be able to get up. Fundraising is something like that. It is like dancing on ice and knowing that you will fall 10,000 times and you will still get up and do it again and again and again. So I think that is what the mentality and mindset you have to have when you're fundraising. And the way you deal with rejection, I don't even call it a rejection. I say that, okay, they're not investing in my venture today because it's not the right thing for them. They will invest tomorrow. No hard feelings. And I've gone back to many VCs, and many of them actually have never invested in any of my ventures. But I still go back to them, and they come back to me, and I have a relationship with them. I have referred many other companies to them in which they have invested. They have referred me to many other VCs who have invested in me. So it's a network. So we don't take it, it's all professional. I present it to them, they said, Naveed, that's not the right deal for us. No problem, boss. Okay, we will see you later. So that's kind of how you deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's wonderful. Well, what about on the question of valuation? I know someone popped in about early stage valuation. You were talking a little bit about, hey, you need to do these 7 things to hit the mark. But what if your idea is seed or very early stage, where you effectively have a business plan, you may have some sort of prototype or sketch or idea, but you haven't yet executed on it? Like, how does one approach valuation? How have you done it for your early stage businesses? And then maybe even, are you maximizing for valuation? Like, are you picking the VC that will give you the highest mark? Or what's your thought process on those early stage companies?
I'll give you, I actually almost never done that. In reality, I have never taken an idea to a VC when it was just an idea. I always believe that I use my own resources, or I'll rely on myself to take the idea to a certain maturity level. So I have never experienced what most people just take a idea, because I just don't like doing that. I like to flush out the idea. I would have hired 2-3 people. Because if I cannot even hire 3-4 people, it means my idea is no good. Because if I cannot convince 3 people to join me, that's no good. If I cannot get some volunteer help, get some vendors to work with me, it's no good. So what I have done is that I have got vendors to work with me, because let me give you my current company. I needed in that company, and I needed somebody to do some work for me. I promised them that once I raise the money, I will give you $2.5 million, and I'll give you 2% of my company when I raise the money. And I was able to convince them to do that. So they did the design for me. They hired some people, did it, and we just finished that contract, and we gave it to them. So I basically always like to take it to a certain maturity level before I take it to VCs. That's number one. Now, how do you even set the valuation, right? So to me, the valuation is something that you set. I have never let a VC set my valuation. I always said, okay, here's the value of the business. Why? Because I have so many people working. There is other competitive business which started, and I can track their valuation. I could say that, okay, I can do a backward valuation. I can say that my revenue next year is going to be 10 million. This thing is 10 times revenue. So the company valuation next year would be 100. Working backwards, today where I'm at, I should take a fraction of this 100. So I should be at 40 million. So you do it that way. But you set the valuation. In my life, I have never taken an empty term sheet. I always write the term sheet. I take the term sheet to a VC. I said, I have an idea that we can work together, and here's my proposal for a term sheet. And the valuation is there. And then most of the time people argue, but then once you put the base valuation, then they'll argue on that. You don't go with a blank scale. Most people say, well, you might be underselling. So maybe I went with 40 million and people would have offered me 100 million. Well, that tells me that I don't know my business. So I'm the best valuation for my business. I should set the number and I stick to that. And if somebody says, and I say 40 and they want to do 20, I said, obviously we don't see eye to eye, and I should go on. But if somebody is willing to offer me 100 and I only put down 40, well, that shouldn't be the case. How can I be so blind to my own opportunity? So that's how I have always done, is that I believe the entrepreneur should control the valuation and know the valuation and be able to do enough steps to convince yourself. And those comes from convincing vendors to work with you, convincing other people to leave their jobs, resign and join with you. And that means you have already jumped. Most of the people are working in a company, they have an idea and they want to start a company. Well, if you're not willing to jump ship, nobody's going to invest in your idea. You have to jump ship. You have to convince other people to jump ship. You have to get other people to work with you, all without any money. Because if you cannot do that, the idea is not good enough. It has to be good enough for those people to be able to validate, right? That's your first validation. So that's how I have done it.
Great. Great. So maybe just switching gears a little bit to maybe then like types of investors. So, this recent venture, you mentioned 800 different investors you've gone out to and had conversations. How do you think about what type of business you're building and what stage it's in, and therefore which investors to target? And is it a very sort of razor focused niche approach depending on business and stage? Do you go wide? Does it depend on the business? Like what's the right strategy there?
So I'll give you some concrete examples. So I think it helps. So a year ago, I was running a group of companies all related to Risk5. And one of those companies was Sci5. So when I started Sci5, Risk5 did not have enough market acceptance. It was simply not there. So my strategy was that if I can convince Intel to put in a couple of $1 million, I can get Qualcomm to put in a few $1 million. Nobody will ever know how much money they put in because that is never declared. What the world will know, Intel is behind this company. Qualcomm is behind this company. Samsung is behind the company. Hynix is behind the company. Western Digital. Then it starts looking serious. Why is all those amazing companies are behind this? There must be something to it, right? So although working with strategic investors is hard, is difficult, but my approach towards them has been, I come up with a standard term sheet to work with strategic investors. And what it means is that I'll take the same amount of money from everyone. Why? Because if you take different amounts of money, then you have to give them different rights. That quickly becomes a very difficult proposition. Because if you work with Intel, then Intel says, oh, I want a favored nation status. Well, then you work with Samsung, says, what, Intel put in only 2 million, I'm putting in 5 million, my rights should be more than Intel. Okay, then you have that problem. So if you say, okay, all right, guys, everybody's going to put in 2 million, and this is standard rights, and I'm not going to do any side letter. That is how you get through that. Or if you're going to do a side letter, then it's going to be the same side letter for everybody. Otherwise, strategic investors negotiation becomes difficult because every time you give somebody a right, the next guy who's putting in a slightly more money wants more rights. And then your term sheets become more and more and more complicated. And in a couple of rounds, it becomes a nightmare to deal with it, right? So this is, I think, how sort of you deal with the strategic investors. But I think as the growth of the company, I think there are very clear group of investors who do early investment, Series A, and then people who do Series B, C kind of thing. And then there are growth investors. And so they are very clearly delineated. And even within funds, like in DFJ, for example, there is a venture fund, there is a growth fund, there is a private equity firm. So even within the firm, like Sequoia has it, and others have it now. So so you don't have to go out of the family. But I think the most important thing you do, in my view, is that you do due diligence on VC. I think that's most people don't do that. People act very desperate and they work with VCs. So I really like to work with VCs. First of all, I have an alignment on the vision, right? That this is the company where do you believe in this? Number one. Number two, I study their funds. What is their check size? I'm looking for somebody to put in 15, but let's say their minimum check size is 25 or 50. They can work with me. Then each VC, depending upon that, needs a certain percentage of your company. You need to know that formula. Okay, if you're working with Sequoia or Mayfield, Norvest, they have a formula. You put in $10 million, they need 15% of the company. Okay, that means a certain valuation has to be there for them to come in. You need to know that. Then you need to know from which one fund you are taking the money. The fund should have enough life in it. If the fund is nearing its end, that could be a catastrophic for your company because they put in the money. 2 years later, they have to retire the fund. Then you are looking at, a bullet to your head. You do not want that. You want to invest in the fund which is starting, not ending, right? So you should be conscious of that. Then you should also look at that people that you're working with, is that how do they work on the board? Would that work with the culture of the company? Would taking one investor, taking other investor, are you going to have a problem on the board? Are they very strong personalities? So these are about 7, 8 different criteria that I look for. And I think that's how you can decide who's the right VC, who's in the right stage of the company, and how do you deal with strategic. So I think it's a lot of due diligence, a lot of hard work, but again, no rocket science.
Yeah. Maybe Dr. Sherwani, share a story with us where you did all the homework and you thought you picked the right investor, whether culturally or dollars wise or stage, and then it turned out not to be true. Like how, and you don't have to name specifics obviously, but just kind of curious generally what went wrong, what did you learn from it, how did you handle that particular investor or board member after the investment?
Yeah, I think I have several stories. It's not one, and things do go wrong. And I think the things do go wrong is not because you picked, but I think the situation changed. Maybe the company is not what the company was to be, and then the situation with the fund changed, or you thought that you'll get this board member, but you got a different board member. So I think a lot of the stories we had are when the board member changes. That is because I went with a certain board member, and that board member has a unique style, and that I like that style. And then, and then the company changed, that board member, that partner left. Now a very different partner is there. Now that happens. So I think that is, and sometimes you can work with that, sometimes you can't work with that, but that I think is one example that comes to my mind. That has happened at least 3 times to me, that we started with the board member, great life. And then the fund changed, the guy left the fund. Now they appointed somebody different. I don't know that person. It's a new person, doesn't know the history of the company, doesn't have any relationship, comes in with a different agenda. And I think is one example that is very hard to work with. And so that's why I always like to go with those VCs which are not likely to change. They are life termers. They started those funds. They're not just doing a gig there. So don't go with a partner who's been there very recently, or you don't know if he will stay there. Go with the guy who started the fund. The guy cannot leave the fund. And so those are the kind of things I try to. I think the other thing to watch out for, which is very important, is that you should be in a constant touch with your board members. This is 25% of CEO's job. Do not talk to your board members in board meetings. You should talk to them every month. You should do them to every other week. Take them out for lunch. Then give them information about the company. They should never find out anything in the board meeting. If a board member finds anything in a board meeting, that is where the divergence between the board member and the CEO starts. So I think board management is a skill that a CEO must learn. Most CEOs are not good at it. They treat board members as investors. Okay, when they come to the board meeting, I'll tell them whatever I tell them. Wrong approach. You should tell them everything, especially bad news, before the board meeting. Take their feedback, incorporate their feedback. So when to the board meeting should be as boring as possible. In fact, nothing should happen in board meeting, and all the action should happen before the board meeting. So I think this is how you can stop the divergence and people you thought who were there. And that, I think that is very important, that board management and the time that CEO spends on board management should be clearly delineated, and the CEO should do that.
Great. One of the questions in the chat, just generically asking, how does one go about talking to VCs or approaching them if you don't have any prior relationships or networks or links? And maybe the same question for if you're looking for advisors is another question around your startup, but don't know that universe. Like, how do you get advisors engaged? How do you just cold reach out to VCs? Like, what's any advice on any of that?
Yeah, I think this is where organizations like Open, there's an organization called Park Launch, there are several others. They help because they can make the connections. But the second thing you have to understand is that if you think that you have a problem, that you have a business plan and you want to raise some money, it's a problem in life. Believe on the other side of this equation, there's another guy who has a bigger problem than you. That guy has taken money from a whole bunch of LPs. He doesn't have enough deal flow. Time is running out on his fund. He needs to invest this. Do you know every year how many funds actually shut down in Bay Area because they just didn't find the funds deals and they returned the money? Many. I remember 4 years ago, 3 years ago, the number was 22 funds shut down. So every year actually, so you're not a beggar. You are an entrepreneur. You have a need for capital to grow your business, but the venture capitalists have a need for you because he needs to find deals to actually deploy his capital. If he cannot deploy his capital, he has to shut down the fund. So even if you randomly cold call VCs, they'll take your call. Many VCs have now put up their email addresses on their websites now because they are hungry for deals. Of course, they have some junior people scan through these business plans and alert them. So the skill you need to have is that how do you send some email to people, typically through a reference. Like if people approach me, I gladly give references to VCs. You know why? I am making two sets of friends, entrepreneurs who love me because I'm making connections and VCs who love me because I'm giving the deal flow. Why would I not do that? And I also got to know some interesting deal plans along the, business deals along the way. So I think all senior entrepreneurs love to do that. I love to do that. I know many people who love to do that. Anybody on the call who like any connections, I'm available. And by the way, it's a win for me. It's not a burden for me. You send me your business plan, I look at it. I say, well, Sequoia won't do it. Mayfield might. Norwest should not do that. In Norwest, if I can get Matt, it's better than promote. All right, let's send it to Matt. And all I will do, I'll send it to Matt and say, Matt, this is a guy who approached me. I think looks like a kind of an interesting business plan. Have a look, see if you like it. If you like it, call this guy. Otherwise, pass. That's it. It takes me less than 30 seconds and it allowed me to connect with Matt. And says, oh, Naveed, what's going on with the rest of your gang? All right, good. Let's have a lunch sometime. So I book a little meeting with Matt, go have coffee with him, renewed my relationship, put your deal through that. Maybe he will fund, maybe he won't, doesn't matter. He got his deal flow, you got VC to talk to. I think that's how it works.
Great. So just switching gears a little bit, you and I were chatting about this before we formally started the session, but lots going on in the hardware space, lots going on in what is now being phrased as deep technology, at least in the Valley. And some would argue you've been doing deep technology for 35, 40 years. So there's a series of questions that folks had in that vein around milestones that you need to hit early on before you raise money, especially for hardware-based startups. Do you have to always prove your idea on real silicon? How's that different from the Valley versus in Pakistan, the hardware versus software ecosystem? What is that tipping point? Have you seen it different for your more software-oriented businesses versus your chip or deep technology requires some capital investment before returns? Like what's the split, and how do you see the world, hardware, software, prototyping or not?
So yeah, software building a minimum viable product thanks to open source stacks is a low cost affair, and you could actually build that, but you have to build it. That does take some time. It does take some team. It's not zero cost, but it is a lower cost than hardware. In hardware, I think the minimum viable product is not a chip. It is not something because that does cost a significant more money. I think you have to have 3 or 4 elements to get funding in hardware. Number one, whatever that idea that you have or a chip you're proposing, you should have clearly a very experienced team to eliminate the risk that the chip will come back not working. And the only you can offer is that, I have this team. They have clearly done chips like that before. So let's take out the risk that chip will not work. Then the second risk is the business risk. So first you take out the execution risk, then you talk about the business risk. then you can say that if you make the chip, is anybody going to buy that? That doesn't cost any money. I think you can go talk to all the major customers and say, I have this. We just started a company called Elastics.Crowd. We just got it funding. We operated the company for 6 months. We were already talking to about 20 customers. It's a CLX company. And they were loved. I mean, we were talking to Intel and Cisco and AMD and ARM and Samsung and Hynix. They love to take our calls. We are educating them about CXL and says, we want to build this switch. We are building this product. Would you be interested in that? They say, well, we'd like this. Well, we like to do this. Okay, great. Can you give us a little bit of specification? So we start making an Excel sheet. What features do you want? We got that. So when we went to the VCs, we said, you know what? We have gathered features from 20 people like Intel, like Samsung, like Hynix, like Western Digital. These are big names. Didn't cost us any money. So we took out the business risk, right? And they even told us that what they will pay us for the chip, right? So that risk is gone. So if you can take out the execution risk, and if you can so then you're going to the VCs with that. Then the third thing is, do you have the ability to hire the team? Do you have the ability? Well, then you have to be able to have enough people to convince to join you without money. So then you take out the business, the team and execution risk on that side, right? So to me, it's eliminating as many risks as possible before you go to the VC. Because VCs are very systematic people. They look at these risks. They have a way to compute these risks. They do all this analysis to figure out. So this is a proof you need. I have the team that can build a chip. They have built the chips before. I have talked to all these customers. They clearly want it. In fact, they were willing to give me some prototype money. In our case, in Elastic.Crowd, we are able to even get some prototype money from some of these customers. And the third thing is that I have been able to convince 5 people to join me. They left their job at Intel, they left their job at Samsung, they left their job at Apple to join me. You think these are idiots? No, these are industry leaders. They know what they're doing. So I think this is how you do it. Without that, I think no VC should invest. If you cannot hire 5 people, if you cannot talk to 20 customers, if you have not done the homework that you need, I don't think people should invest anyway. And I think that's how you can go over. But let me take you to the second part of your question, is that the hardware software divide and what I see in hardware, what new innovations are happening. I think in hardware, we're just starting. I was giving this lecture at the Chinese Academy of Sciences about a month ago. And they were saying that, do you think that innovation on hardware has happened and now we are coming to a cycle where it's going to become mature? I said, what are you talking about? I think we have not even started in hardware. I can see new materials. I can see new packaging technologies. I can see new architectures. I can see more nations jumping in, putting R&D money. I see this US-China trade war. I call it trade Olympics going on between the two, which is going to spur both of them to put more money and compete with each other. Actually, we need that. It's good. In semiconductor, I'll do 3 nanometer, I'll do 2, I'll do 1 nanometer, I'll do half nanometer. Good, compete. That will bring more competition, more. India jumps in, Israel jumps in, other people jump in, Taiwan wants to jump in, Korea wants to jump in. I think that's happening. More nations are competing. So I believe the next 20, 30 years of semiconductors is going to be an exciting time. And I think whatever we have seen in the last 40, I think the time is going to get compressed. In the next 10, we're going to see what we saw in the last 40 years. And I think I'm looking forward to that. I think a lot of exciting things with 3D packaging. We are seeing a lot of things with chip-to-chip interconnect, new materials. And now we have enough horsepower, bandwidth to be able to, simulate these new materials and see how they would. So yeah, I think a lot of exciting things ahead of us.
Great. So I'm just going to pick up on that thread because there's 3 or 4 questions in the chain about semiconductors specifically, and I know this is a wide audience, so don't want to spend too much time on it. But there are a couple of questions around your involvement in the open source FPGA Foundation, the role of FPGAs, and I'm embarrassed to admit I have no idea what that is. So maybe if you can explain what that is. The same on what are your thoughts about EDA and hardware ventures in Pakistan, and the future of EDA, and maybe thoughts on a semiconductor services business. So I don't know any of those things, but maybe just explain for the audience, sure. And if you can talk about those 3 areas.
Yeah, so FPGA stands for Field programmable gate array. And simply stated, it's kind of a chip that you can program while it has been deployed. So let's say you bought a chip that is in your laptop, but actually you can change the functionality of the chip when you have the laptop at your home. So you have the ability to reprogram the chip, and it will run different kind of programs than it was running before. Let's say you bought a laptop and it had a hardware accelerator for video, but then you realize I don't like to do video. I'm more of a audio guy, and I want to reprogram my laptop. Now it will do even better job at audio, but not do video, right? But you could actually reprogram those chips to do those kind of things. These are called field programmable chips or field programmable gate arrays. So I got involved in field programmable gate arrays mainly because I am a person who believes in something called democracy of silicon. The democracy of silicon means that we should get all nations on the world, give them the opportunity so they can build their own solutions in silicon, so that no nation will be blackmailed by the people who do have silicon. Because I see nations will divide of haves and have-nots. And just like in oil and coffee, in sugar, slaves, you can go back in history. Always there are two kinds of nations: people who have something and the people who don't have something. And then that a tussle starts, and then the next 50, 70 years that happens. Silicon is in grave danger of being that next commodity that will divide the nations into two parts. The nations which will have silicon will then basically choke banking, healthcare, military, education, everything of those nations who do not and cannot make their chips, because you have to buy chips from somebody. So nations are going to fight for the independence of chips. What we can do as academicians, researchers, entrepreneurs, make sure the technology is open source, available to everybody. You have a passion for building chips. You're Brazilian, you're Pakistani, you're Indian, you're Egyptian, you're Turkish, you're Lebanese. Go build your chips. And then you don't have to depend on somebody else. So that's the general theme. The FPGA Foundation plays a big role because we have taken a bigger charter of trying to start doing these tape outs all over the world, which we call it a tape out world program. We are working with universities. We started with US, then India, then Pakistan, then Sri Lanka, then Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey. So we are starting these programs where kids, I call them kids, college kids, university kids, will be trained so that they can start doing their own chips, very simple chips, very small chips, get them excited about doing chips, learn things like that. So that is the reason I got involved in FPGA Foundation. Then the other question was that what do I see about the situation of similar kind of things in Pakistan? I think Pakistan is in a very fortunate situation right now that then a grand opportunity is knocking on our doors. And the grand opportunity is as follows. The world needs over 1 million designers, chip designers, people who need to work on verification, board core level, chip level, with layout, partitioning, a lot of other aspects of chip design. Over 1 million people, according to my estimate. But 500,000 of them are needed in China. China is going to go source these people from countries which they think are friendly to them. So what are these countries which are on one belt, one road? Because that is their global ambition of connecting these companies. Well, Pakistan happens to be on one such country. Not only that, it is a special status because of CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So as a result, there is an opportunity for Chinese and Pakistani entrepreneurs, Chinese companies can start design centers in Pakistan because they need 500,000 people. I can tell you there are no 500,000 people in China. For my own 3 startups in China, we are trying to hire for the last 3 months. I've not been able to hire a single person. Why? Not enough people, and the ones are really asking for Bay Area salaries or higher. Why? Because there are thousands of startups in China, thousands. So they need lots of people. So I think that's an opportunity for Pakistan. I have been talking about it. I'm working with Pakistan government at Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Education, working with anybody who will listen to me, that let's get this collaboration going. We are trying to get the universities together. There's a lot of opportunities for Pakistanis to come to China and actually work. In fact, if you have a master's or a PhD, and if you came to China, you will automatically get a job. This is a default situation. You came here, you did a master, you will get a job. If you get a PhD, you get a job. There are so many jobs that nobody will go back to Pakistan. They will have a chance to work here for a few years to get experience. Then you can go back to Pakistan and you can do whatever you want to do. Yeah. So there is no visa restrictions. This is a simple thing. Even you're doing a bachelor, I'll advise you work 2 years in Pakistan somewhere, then come here and you do your bachelor. Because if you are a bachelor with 2 years of experience anywhere in the world, again, you get a job in China. Same thing, we are trying to encourage Chinese companies to do that. So that's a China. Okay, even in US, there is a lot of demand for these services which are low cost. India cost is rising, Vietnam cost is rising, China cost is rising. So it's an opportunity for countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. East European companies are also becoming now a little bit more expensive. I think this is a golden opportunity for Bangladesh, for Pakistan, for Sri Lanka. Good population base, very well educated, English speaking. They can do a lot of business with US as well. So I think services, especially gig type of economy where you can do verification, other work that can be done. I think Pakistan has like 150,000 people doing that work in software. I think some of them can be trained to do, because that work is very similar to software kind of work, can be trained, may take 3 to 4, 6 months training. So I think there are a lot of opportunities and it's a historic opportunity. I think Pakistan should seize and then take that opportunity.
And Dr. Sherwani, you've done, just again, picking up on that thread, a lot of work with mentoring women, and obviously that's a big topic of conversation in the US at least, but women leaders, women CEOs, and one of the questions someone had was, how do we sort of as a country or of Pakistani heritage, a group, encourage participation of women in technology broadly, but certainly on the hardware side, it's a even more dismal percentage of women to men. And what are the kinds of efforts we could do, or the things folks on this phone could do, or on this call could do to encourage more women and folks of diverse backgrounds entering and taking chances?
I grew up in a household where I have 4 strong sisters, a very strong mother who ran the household. I saw firsthand, having strong women around you, how much value they add and how society becomes so much better when the contribution comes from both sides. If you ever come to China and visit it, you will see one striking difference between China and the rest of the world: the number of women that work in the workplace. It is amazing. It's amazing. In US, we don't have that kind of women. And in Europe, we don't have that kind of women. And this is, I don't know how many things Mao Zedong got wrong, but he got one thing right. And what he got right is he was very strongly that everybody should work. And the net result of that today, after 70 years, they are everywhere. And society has really prospered because they are everywhere. I think the damage to women that we do that as brothers, we do that as fathers, and we do that at very early age. I think our responsibility as brothers and fathers is when we see a small little girl, do not limit her, do not dissuade her, do not push her away from engineering, do not push her away from STEM, encourage them. I believe this is where the damage happens. By the time they are grade 7 or 8, they've already been told and pre-told in their mind, oh, you cannot do math, it's too hard for you. This damage is done in Pakistan, this damage is done in US, this damage is done all over the world to these poor women. I don't know why. I do not know why. I think everybody listening to us today, they can take a pledge. Every time I see a little girl, I ask her, how's your math going? Why don't you do math? Why don't you do science? Why don't you do geography? What can I do to help you? And what are the exciting things you're doing in science? Don't talk to them about other things which we call girly stuff. Those days are over. Everybody has to contribute to. We need them. We need women. Look at the societies where women are participating. What is happening to them? Look at the growth rate of China. I cannot believe that women are not contributing to this growth rate. I think they are. And I think in Pakistan, if we can get 20, 30, 40% more women to start contributing, Pakistan will do better. Workplace gets better. Environment gets better. Overall situation gets better. We will win. So I think we should do everything possible as teachers, as brothers, as fathers. And by the way, women fighting for their rights is the wrong thing. Men should be fighting for the. So whenever I see women fighting, I said, well, they should be fighting anyway. We should be fighting for their rights. We should be out there saying that, okay, why don't we see enough women here? And at least in open, I'm very proud to say, our global next president is woman. 4 or 5 chapter presidents are women. In all our boards, we have women. And it is not an accident. We encourage them, we cherish them, we help them, we encourage them, and we love it. They are adding a lot of value, and I love all of them. They have done a great job, and I hope more and more will join. And we like more women, at least in open, and any other organization. I like to have more women because I think they really make very positive contributions. And it should not be even a debatable subject. It is something that we should just simply do. It's too late. We should have been doing that 100 years ago.
Great. Yeah. Well said. It's hard to go back to the business topics after, but just a quick reminder, I've tried to capture most of the questions folks have asked. If you've got any burning questions, please put them in the chat. And I'm also put in my own contact information for those that need it. So maybe 1 or 2 last questions, Dr. Sherwani, as we wrap here. Can you talk a little bit about when you decided you were going to sell your company? So we've talked a lot about fundraising, but on the other end of it, when is the right time? Why did you decide to sell? Why not grow it more? What was the thought process on exit?
I think there are 3 things that you should know about yourself. And I think that's very important. You should know your weaknesses. And you should know the weaknesses of your team. And you should know the weaknesses of your business plan. If you know these 3 weaknesses, it will tell you when to sell. If I, as a CEO, have a weakness that I cannot grow a business and scale it to a certain level, I should know that. If I can grow a business to 100 million, but I cannot take it to 500, I should know that. I should not sacrifice the business for a learning opportunity for myself. I should go get a job at Intel and go practice there. Because with this company, the lives of so many people are tied. That's one. Secondly, you should know the weaknesses of your team. Can your company go execute and fight with this big competition that are there? Do they have that bench strength? Do they have it in them to that? And then you should know the strength of your business plan. Do we have enough margin? Do we have enough innovation? Do we have enough productivity to go fight and play? Or do we need somebody to take over and inject a lot of capital? Or do we need, like for example, I've sold companies when I knew that my sales force can sell 100 million, but they just cannot sell 500 million. I need to become a part of a larger company because scaling that sales force would have been literally impossible with the capital I can raise. Because capital I had to raise would have diluted me so much. So I always ask people is that, do you know your weaknesses? Let me tell you another thing. If I go to a restaurant, a waiter comes and tells me, I ask the waiter, what is the worst thing in this restaurant? What is the absolutely worst dish? And I do that with my team members. What is your biggest nightmare? What is your worst weakness? What is your toughest weakness? Because then we know our weaknesses, we will know what we can do. Otherwise, people have some very glorious ideas about what they can do, which is misplaced on not facts. It's because the truths and half-truths they have told each other. So my request to everybody is know yourself first, know your weakness, what you cannot do. Then know your team, then know your business. Then you can say, okay, the exit that I'm getting, would it compensate for some of the weaknesses? I would be replaced by a better CEO. Okay, you win because you own a percentage of the business, which some of my team members will be replaced by some of the better team members. That's win. Would my business plan would be enhanced because joining with a larger company or private equity injecting more money, I didn't have that. If the answer is a yes, yes, or some yeses, that's when you sell. If you could do it, if the answer is no, I know I can do it, I know my team can do it, I know my business plan can scale, then you should keep on scaling.
Great. That's wonderful. So maybe just last question for me, and I apologize I haven't gotten to every one of the questions from folks, but we're trying to keep it general enough for the audience. So we'll end with a little bit of an open-ended question. So if you're giving one piece of advice to your young self from 35 years ago, 40 years ago, as you were first getting started, what is one thing that you wish you knew then that you have now learned over the years? And I know you've given us lots and lots and lots of advice here, but what's the one most important thing you wish you knew?
I wish I knew my weaknesses. I now know that an entrepreneur needs 15 skills. And if I knew what are the skills I did not have, I would have gathered people around me with those skills, which I didn't. So if you think about that, most people start the company and they very proudly come and tell me, you know, I have these old college buddies and we have decided to start a company. And I said, okay, stop right there. That's a disaster. Because if you have out of the 15, 7 skills, most likely those guys have the same 7 skills. And actually you're going to go nowhere in life. You should look at the 15 skills that you need. Your co-founders should fill in the gaps that you don't have. Then once you bring the rest of the team, they should fill in the remaining gaps that your co-founders don't have and your co-founders do have. But that equation is all based on knowing your weaknesses. And I learned this lesson when I started doing my PhD. My first advisor was a very famous guy, a brilliant, amazing, his name was Dr. Klarner. He's a genius. IQ somewhere in the range of 165, 175 Mensa scale. And he was a paraplegic. From age 3, he went in a chair, and he never got out of the chair. He has no use of his body below his chest. And he was one of the most brilliant. If you go look at the web and type David Klarner's name, he solved some of the toughest problems in the world of mathematics and computer science. I asked him, Dr. Klarner, how can you, sitting in this chair, become world famous and do all this? And he told me one thing. Because of my disability, I learned very early in life what I cannot do. I don't waste any time doing it. So I think if I knew my weaknesses, I would have done 2 things. I would have surrounded myself with people who can compensate, and I would have found mentors to fill in the weaknesses I have. I did learn it. I learned it 10 years later. I got this, but there was a wasted 10 years that had I been mentored, then Naveed, let me tell you, out of the 15 skills, you have only 10. There are 5 you are really, really missing. Let's start a program to start giving you those skills. And in the meantime, we are going to hire 2 guys who have those 5 skills. So 3 of you as co-founders have all the 15 skills to start. So I really think everybody, if you can really, really self-analyze and say that, okay, let me tell you, these are the skills I don't have. And then I think that is the best advice I can give. This is the best advice I have. And since I am getting older, I'm losing skills. So now I need actually more people around me than I needed before, because and you become lazy when you're older. So maybe I am getting lazier. But my point really is, I think knowing myself and knowing my weaknesses have allowed me to do better in life. And that's the best advice I can give. Know your weaknesses.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sherwani. I'm inspired by this session, and hope some or all of you are as well. I'm 1 to 1.5 years new to Open, but this is exactly why I've participated. I'm active because these kinds of sessions and bringing folks together with the entrepreneurial interest and really creating a network and a community is very, very important to our organization as we continue to expand globally. And thank you to you, not just for this session, but you as a researcher, as an entrepreneur, have pushed us to the edge of physics, and the hardware work that you've done. You've taken the time to turn around and teach it. So in the books you've written and the papers you've authored and the classes you're teaching as an academic. So thank you for all of that, all the philanthropic stuff you're doing as well on the ground in Pakistan and elsewhere. So from the bottom of my heart, and thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your experiences with us.
My pleasure. Anybody who would like to reach out to me, please, anything I can do to help, if I can push any entrepreneur one step further and they can be closer to their journey, it would be my pleasure. I'm a very reachable person. You can reach me through LinkedIn and many other ways. Of course, I'm a chartered member of Open. Any Open member, I'm part of those groups. Reach out to me, anything I can do. I always answer phone calls. I always answer tasks. I make it my duty to do that. I try to help as I can. So it would, and thank you for having me. It was a great fun. Thank you so much, and look forward to listening to all other. This is a great session, and Mozam and the gang have done a good job of getting all people together. Love listening to those sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.